Hi, I'm Max Brooks, and this is Max Brooks Breaks Down. And while the last two videos were more kind of how-to videos, with this one, I want to focus on an issue that I don't think is getting nearly as much attention as it should. Because when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine, we've been talking a lot about arming the Ukrainians, which we should, and putting economic pressure on Russia, which we should, but we're not talking enough about a source of power that possibly could help end this war because it has helped end previous Russian wars. And that's why now we are going to break down the power of the mothers of Mother Russia. I am here with Professor Lionel Beehner. He has taught military innovation at West Point. He has worked on the crossroads of technology and peacekeeping at the United Nations, and he has written extensively on Russian casualty aversion, which is just a very fancy way of saying what Sting once said, the Russians love their children too. Now, Lionel, we tend to think of the Russian way of war as paying any price, but that was World War II, where it was a war of defense, it was a war of survival. And what you're saying is in wars of aggression on foreign soil, they don't want to die for that.
No, and Max, they actually, these are not wars of, these are wars of choice. These aren't, the Russians aren't fighting the Nazis anymore. They're much more fighting a smaller fry. They're fighting insurgents. They're fighting small countries like Georgia and Ukraine. So they haven't had that kind of existential fight, as it were, when they go to fight.
So talk a little bit about when this first started, when we first started to get an idea that they were not willing to pay any price. Was this in the 1980s Afghan war?
Correct. So, they're going to kind of end up in Afghanistan in 1979, 80. And they will fight a long, protracted conflict that doesn't get a lot of attention in the news. It's not going to be covered on the front pages every day. And they're fighting in a way that's not the same way it's the Russian way of counterinsurgency, as it were. They're throwing about 15,000 troops are going to die in this war, but most of them are not going to get any kind of attention. There's no sense of, they're dying in droves towards the end of the war. And it's finally the Russian mothers kind of are the ones who step up and say, wait a minute here, why are our sons dying for this cause that nobody knows what we're fighting for exactly? And that's going to change the course of the war in a sense, because Mikhail Gorbachev, who's going to come in 1985 on a policy of glasnost and perestroika, which means an opening and kind of, being a little bit more transparent, is going to start showcasing their deaths and trying to use the heroism and trying to use the grief of these mothers, but it actually will turn against them. And we'll see actually a lot more public outcry about the war, which will eventually lead to the war ending in 89.
Okay, now you just brought up, I think, the critical point of what we need to talk about, because you've written about this. I've tried to write about this and get the conversation going. Russian mothers, they are the real power behind the throne. They are what the leaders are afraid of. They do not want to lose their children. So talk to me a little bit about the committee of what used to be Soviet soldiers' mothers and now the committee of Russian mothers.
So again, they're going to start to really organize. And remember, this is before the advent of cell phones and internet. So they're organizing in a way that's, and again, this is across the Soviet Union. You've got 11 time zones of soldiers' mothers who are pissed off because they don't know where their kids are. How do they get their sons back? And they're also wondering about how to get into a Politburo that's not used to ever having to answer to public opinion. So, and the war is about the end. They're going to form and actually start doing things like marches. They're going to do sit-ins. They do hunger strikes, all the kinds of ways of social movements that we see kind of common today in the pre-internet. But in the pre-internet era, this was actually starting to get attention. And they did, they started to actually galvanize a lot more during the wars in Chechnya. If you remember, we go to war in Chechnya in 94, 95. There's a second war in 1999 and 2000. And the wars there are not, they're not, again, it's not the second, this is not the Great Patriotic War. This is not the fight against the Nazis. These They're sending conscripts into Chechnya, and it's basically a slaughterhouse. And they're dying in droves. They're using overwhelming firepower. They're laying siege to a city, Grozny, that most is kind of seen as a backwater. They're absolutely using overwhelming force. There's massive civilian casualties. But the important thing to these mothers is what's going on with our kids. We don't know why they're dying, and they're not dying for a cause that we even know about. This is going to kind of follow Putin, because remember, Putin was going to come to power in the second Chechen war. And a lot of us forget, but in 2000, a submarine will essentially blow up and crash, and 118 men will die. And these are sailors. And these moms are pissed off, and they want answers. And where is Putin? So they finally have a press conference. They don't let in the foreign press. Some people sneak in, and they just show kind of a Putin who's just listening to mom scream at him for 3 hours. And we can imagine something similar grievances happening today with the war in Ukraine, but I can't imagine Putin actually allowing in listening to the moms complain today, because he's built such a defensive wall around him today.
This notion that Putin is trying to wall off his people from casualties seems to speak to the fact that he knows how powerful these Russian moms are. He's afraid of them, which is exactly why, if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what Putin is trying to do now is wall off his own people and end this war before the telegrams start coming home.
We're already seeing evidence of that, Max. I mean, we see there's a effort right now that the Ukrainian government is actually trying to organize, but that is linking up the bodies of Russian soldiers with the dead bodies with their mothers who are actively campaigning. I mean, there's something like 600,000 people who are already signed up to this site. There's an extreme information blackout that's happening right now. Russian mothers have been complaining about their sons being conscripted without their approval. There's also there's some evidence about, and again, I can't confirm this, but I've heard that there's a sort of these mobile crematoriums as a way to like not have any kind of bodies being sent back in any kind of way that is identifiable. And so it's really kind of creating this information blackout, and we just don't see the kind of same mobilization as we did back in the wars in Chechnya and before, because the mothers today are they're angry, but Putin has become so isolated from the population he purports to serve. So it's really kind of it's really a tragedy, because as this war goes on, as we get into more urban environments, as you know, it's going to get bloodier.
So Lionel, it sounds like if this war goes on long enough for Putin's wall of silence to crumble, and enough Russian mothers find out that their sons are never coming home, and enough mothers next to them understand that their sons can be next, and they flood every city in Mother Russia, you're saying that they can possibly have an impact in stopping this nightmare?
Absolutely, especially in today's world where information can't just be kept under wraps. I mean, if we look back at the end of the Afghanistan war, it was Russian moms, it was Russian grandmothers who were more instrumental in changing the barracks culture and reversing how the high suicide rate in the Russian and Soviet army back in that day. It was Russian mothers who marched on Grozny and actually occupied a square in downtown Grozny and was able to bring back some POWs. So it's going to be a lot of Russian mothers who are going to have to get organized and actually take to the squares. And again, it's hard to predict, but yes, they can definitely make a difference. And there is going to be, as I said, as this war becomes more and more bloody, as there's more and more casualties, the Kremlin is not going to be able to keep out all of the bad news. And the Russian mothers, the Russian grandmothers, the Russian wives, they're all going to take matters into their own hand. And frankly, it could influence the people around the Kremlin. It could influence the oligarchy. It could influence the officers to change the conduct of the war. We've seen evidence of that in Afghanistan and Grozny, and hopefully we'll see evidence of it in Ukraine.
Lionel, thank you for talking to me today. And thank you for reminding everyone that war is about one simple fact. It's about loss. And when we talk about everything else in this horrible nightmare, we need to focus on the basic fact that there is nothing more powerful in this universe than a mother's love for her child. Thank you for watching. And we should note that only a few days after recording this interview with Lionel, Putin himself made a speech trying to calm the mothers of Mother Russia. So clearly this is an important issue. And while I said this video was not a how-to video, doesn't mean it can't be. So if you have any ideas how to break through Putin's curtain of silence and go directly to the moms of Mother Russia, give me a shout on Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe. And no matter what, don't forget to hug your mom.